Chairman Elias Thorne stood over CEO Dr. Zahra Adana, forcing her to kneel on the expensive rug and pack her career awards into a trash-bound box. He was relishing the public humiliation, calling her unfit for traditional wealth. But as Thorne delivered his final, sneering dismissal, Zahra's finger completed a single, encrypted tap hidden in the box, protocol Chimera active. Before Thorne could finish his sentence, the heavy oak doors of the executive suite crashed inward with shattering force. It was not security, not her lawyers. It was an unexplained federal intervention. The story is just getting interesting. Ensure to subscribe, like and share the video, and also tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. The air in the chairman's office was thick, not just with the scent of aged mahogany and distant cigar smoke, but with a tension so sharp it could cut the panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. This vast room, where billions were decided with a nod, was designed to broadcast the unassailable power of Elias Thorne. Right now, it was serving as his private theater of domination. He stood in a tailored white suit, leaning over the wide, polished desk, his face a terrifying map of theatrical rage, a single, furious finger shaking inches from the target of his wrath, Dr. Zahra Adana. Zahra wasn't standing. She was kneeling on the expensive, deep blue Persian rug, her back straight, her hands working meticulously, packing the tokens of her 3-year tenure as so into a flimsy cardboard box. A small, framed photo of her graduation and a brass Visionary of the Year award were among the sad relics. She was flanked and surrounded by the 6 men of the Executive Council, all silent, all complicit, their expensive suits blending into the dark wood paneling, their faces wearing expressions of practiced indifference that barely masked their relief. The whole spectacle felt medieval, a public shaming disguised as an administrative action. "I warned you, Adana." Thorne's voice boomed, bouncing off the ceiling. He was practically spitting the words. "I gave you every chance to correct your trajectory. You simply do not possess the necessary weight. You fail to uphold the stature of traditional wealth." He threw the term traditional wealth out like a gauntlet, a clear, unmistakable dog whistle for every bias he refused to name outright. Meridian Global Capital is not a charity. It is not an experiment. Your progressive posturing, your attempts to destabilize the firm's image, it ends now. The humiliation was visceral. The Executive Council wasn't just watching her, they were watching her kneel. It was the posture of surrender, and every silent, polished man in the room was drinking it in. Thorne, seeing her lack of outward defiance, became bolder. He snatched her brass nameplate from the edge of the desk, the plate she had just unpacked a year prior, and tossed it carelessly into the box, letting it clang against the award. "Pack it all." Immediately, Thorne demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous snarl. "And when you're done, I want you out of this building and off this floor. The world will see you were an aberration, a temporary misstep in a 100-year legacy." Zahra's internal silence was absolute. The pressure was a physical weight, but she had trained for this moment for 9 months. Every angry word, every prejudiced sneer, every smirk from the council members was merely background noise to the single, critical task at hand. Her humiliation was the camouflage. Her compliance was the final act of the trap. She picked up a stack of printed financial reports, the real reports, not the sanitized quarterly summaries Thorne had been distributing, and placed them carefully in the bottom of the box. As her hand rested near the base, she subtly manipulated the phone she had deliberately concealed beneath the reports, its screen angled away from the room. She was completing the authentication sequence. Click, click. The final code was entered. A tiny, secure command was executed, sent through an encrypted satellite channel designed never to touch Meridian's compromised network. Protocol Chimera active. The trap was fully sprung. She placed the empty box exactly where it was before, rising slowly, deliberately, not looking at Thorne's enraged face, but over his shoulder at the distant, glittering city. She was no longer kneeling. She was standing, taller than any man in the room seemed to expect. The cheap green blazer she wore, the one Thorne always derided for being too vibrant, looked suddenly like a suit of armor. She finally turned her gaze to her former mentor and now mortal enemy. The composure in her eyes was terrifying. "I didn't fail to uphold the stature of Meridian, Elias," she said, her voice low, steady, and utterly cold. "I failed to uphold your corruption." Thorn reeled back, startled by the sudden shift in posture and tone. He opened his mouth to shout another dismissal, but Zahra cut him off, her gaze locking his in place. The council members shifted uncomfortably for the first time. "You wanted this spectacle to erase me. You wanted the world to think I was a failure because of my race, my gender, my vision," she continued, the words measured and precise. "But this isn't my final exit, Elias. This is your final curtain. You wanted me to pack up the evidence of my success. What you didn't realize is that I spent the last year packing up the evidence of your crimes." She took a single step toward him, forcing the chairman to retreat against his massive mahogany desk. Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the room's silence like glass. "You've just guaranteed the collapse of your entire legacy, Elias." Thorn's initial shock, the momentary loss of his carefully cultivated composure, was immediately replaced by a roaring, dismissive laugh. It was loud, booming, and designed to fill the vast office and instantly reassert his dominance. "My legacy? Oh, you truly are a pathetic, naive child, Zahra," he sneered, pulling a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket to dab his brow, as if her small threat had physically exerted him. "You think you're in a film? You think a few whispered rumors and the unpleasantness you tried to dig up will collapse decades of power, influence, and, yes, traditional wealth? You've been watching too much television. Call your lawyer. Call a spiritual advisor. Call anyone you want. The only person who is collapsing here is you, under the weight of your own incompetence." He took a slow, deliberate sip from the crystal glass of whiskey on his desk, his eyes never leaving hers, fully expecting her to flinch, to crumble, to revert to the pleading vulnerability of the woman kneeling just moments before. The 6 executive council members, seeing the chairman regain his footing, quickly relaxed, trading tight, knowing glances. Thorn was back in control. "Do you know what will happen to you now, Zahra?" Thorn continued, his voice taking on a low, lecturing quality. "You will leave this firm, and you will be blacklisted. Every major institution in this city knows you were removed for instability. Your entire career, built on nothing but aggressive, affirmative action placements, is over. Finished. While you waste your time threatening me, I am finalizing the replacement. Someone who truly understands Meridian's history and the need for stature." He turned slightly toward the council, using Zahra as a prop for his grand pronouncement. "We are bringing in Mr. Sterling Voss. Voss is a man who was groomed in the correct banking houses, whose family has 3 generations of capital flowing through these doors. He is dependable. He is, shall we say, a known quantity." The implication was a heavy, undisguised blow. Voss was the opposite of Zahra in every conceivable way, starting with the color of his skin. The tension in the room was excruciating, not because of the physical danger, but because of the raw, suffocating reality of institutional power. It felt like a verdict being read, confirming the hopelessness of fighting the established order. The council members shifted again, their expressions now a mixture of relief that the storm was passing and continued smug satisfaction that their position was safe. Zahra used this exact moment, the moment when Thorn was most arrogant, most distracted, most certain of his impending victory, to conduct her own quiet reconnaissance. She let Thorn's words wash over her without reaction. Her focus narrowed to the 6 men flanking the chairman. They were the key to the entire operation. She cataloged them with clinical precision. There was Alistair Finch, the chief operating officer, a thin man in his late 50s. He was the most visibly anxious, his fingers drumming a frantic, silent rhythm against his thigh. Corrupt, high, involved in the wire fraud scheme. Weakness, his wife's name is on the deed to the shell company's Cayman Island holding account. He was a co-conspirator. Next to him stood Silas Kincaid, the head of fixed income. Silas was the quietest, a massive, imposing man who had simply watched the spectacle with an unnervingly blank expression. Status: simply weak. He likely knew corruption existed, but never participated, too concerned with self-preservation to speak out. He's useful. He can be salvaged. She glanced at Brendan Price, the general counsel. He was the only one avoiding eye contact, staring intensely at the expensive Persian rug. Corrupt, extremely high. He was the architect, the one who buried the loan discrimination complaints and rubber-stamped the illegal transactions. He will be arrested, but he will not break easily. Thorne continued to monologue, oblivious that his audience was conducting a secret audit of his allies. So, run along, Zahra. Call your lawyers. Write your furious op-eds. We, the people who actually run the world, will be busy restoring order. He made a dismissive gesture toward the door. Now, get out of my sight. Zahra didn't move. She held her silent, strategic stance, allowing the tension to build just 1 second longer, forcing the men in the room to feel the last, lingering heat of her defiance before the inevitable. She had gathered all the data she needed, confirming which men were the perpetrators, which were the accessories, and which were the merely complicit bystanders. The stage was set. The final signal was sent. She waited. And then, the massive, antique oak doors of the chairman's office shuddered. Not from a knock, but from a deafening, sudden impact. The heavy doors were thrown inward, crashing against the surrounding wall with a sound that ripped the silence to shreds. The crash of the double oak doors was more than just noise. It was an explosion of reality, instantly shattering the carefully constructed illusion of Elias Thorne's power. His face, moments ago contorted in a sneer of victory, went slack with sudden, raw terror. The 6 members of the executive council froze in various states of smugness, their eyes snapping wide. Through the massive doorway stormed 3 figures in dark, impeccably tailored suits, 2 men and 1 woman, moving with the confident, uncompromising gait of absolute authority. They didn't stop for security, they were security. The first man, tall and stone-faced, flashed a metallic badge that caught the office light. SEC. The woman next to him, her expression grim and focused, displayed the seal of the DOJ. Behind them marched 2 additional figures in darker uniforms, U.S. Marshals, who immediately and silently took up positions securing both the primary exit and the private elevator entrance. The room, which had been Thorne's fortress, instantly became a federal confinement area. The lead DOJ agent, a woman whose severity matched the darkness of her suit, spoke first. Her voice was sharp and clear, devoid of emotion, cutting through the stunned silence. Chairman Elias Thorne, this firm is now under immediate federal supervision. All operations are halted. She held the badge high one last time. Everyone remain in place. No one is to touch a device or leave this room. The shift in power was instantaneous and complete. Thorne gasped, his hand flying to his chest. What is the meaning of this intrusion? You have no jurisdiction. I am the chairman. His voice was a pathetic echo of his earlier boom, now thin and shaking. Brendan Price, the general counsel and architect of Thorne's legal defenses, found his voice first, stumbling forward. You can't just storm a corporate headquarters. This is illegal. I demand to see a warrant, and I demand to know who authorized this. The SEC agent didn't spare a glance for Price. His focus was entirely on Thorne. The warrant is signed by a federal judge and covers immediate seizure of all assets and materials pertaining to systemic financial fraud, insider trading, and obstruction of justice. He delivered the statement with the chilling detachment of a professional carrying out a long-delayed task. Thorne began to sweat visibly, his carefully styled white hair momentarily forgotten. His eyes darted desperately around the room, settling on the council members, looking for support. They were useless, paralyzed by fear and self-interest. His gaze finally snapped back to Zahra, who was standing perfectly still beside the box, her posture unchanged, her eyes coolly observing the destruction of his kingdom. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His face went from pale shock to a sickening crimson. He understood now why she had been so calm, why she had threatened his legacy. This was not a legal skirmish. This was the hammer drop. The lead DOJ agent took a step toward the desk, pulling a thick document from her briefcase. This action was triggered by a complaint filed under the Financial Fraud and Whistleblower Protection Act, supported by 9 months of irrefutable documentary evidence. The complaint alleges that you, Mr. Thorne, have personally defrauded investors, systematically blocked internal compliance efforts, and used racially motivated lending policies to conceal deep-seated operational corruption. She paused, looking directly at the frightened chairman. The source of the evidence, Mr. Thorne, is reliable, internal, and comprehensive. Then, the second shoe dropped, and all eyes in the room, Thorne's, the counsel's, and the marshal's, turned to Dr. Zahra Adana. She was the only person who hadn't moved since the doors crashed open, the only person who didn't look surprised. Her silence, moments ago a sign of humiliation, now declared her absolute, devastating control. The source? Who authorized this travesty? You have no standing. Elias Thorne shrieked, his face now truly demonic, the last vestige of his dignity dissolving into pure, panicked rage. He staggered back toward his heavy desk, his movement jerky and uncontrolled. This is an attack. A corporate raid. I demand to know who filed this ridiculous complaint. The lead SEC agent, a man named Agent Reynolds who looked like granite in a suit, gave Thorne a cold, level stare. He didn't bother arguing with the chairman's frantic accusations. The time for discussion was over. He simply turned his attention to the woman standing beside the abandoned cardboard box. Dr. Zahra Adana was no longer the CEO being fired. She was the architect of the federal operation. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped away from the box, reclaiming the center of the office. The contrast between her composure and Thorne's crumbling hysteria was devastating. Her green blazer, which Thorne had scorned, now felt less like a fashion choice and more like a uniform of war. It was in this moment of absolute, searing silence that Agent Reynolds gave the definitive answer, aiming his voice not at Thorne, but at the entire, terrified executive council. Mr. Thorne, Dr. Adana, is under the protection of the Financial Fraud and Whistleblower Protection Act. She is the individual who provided the federal government with the entirety of the evidence. The words landed in the room like a physical shockwave. The council members, Alastair Finch, Silas Kincaid, Brendan Price, reacted instantly. Finch gasped audibly, clutching his tie. Price, the general counsel, looked as if he might vomit, the realization of his own impending legal ruin hitting him hardest. She's a traitor, Thorne stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Zahra. Zahra finally spoke, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the chaos. She didn't deny the accusation. She owned it. I am not a traitor, Elias. I am a fiduciary, and I spent 9 months documenting every scheme, every illicit transfer, every single instance of criminal mismanagement you committed while you were busy taking credit for the honest turnaround work I delivered. Agent Reynolds followed up Zahra's statement with the full, devastating weight of the federal charges. He pulled a comprehensive list from the folder, the details sounding impossibly real and dark in the gilded office. The evidence provided by Dr. Adana is irrefutable. It outlines a decade-long scheme involving insider trading using Meridian's non-public knowledge of mergers, systematic tax fraud through a network of unregistered shell corporations. The very companies you use to finance your properties in the Hamptons, Mr. Thorne, and chronic, systemic discrimination in hiring and loan approvals designed to keep out qualified individuals who did not fit your archaic, traditional wealth profile. As the agent read the list, Zahra fixed her gaze on the executive council. She saw the terror in Alastair Finch's eyes, the man involved in the wire fraud. She saw the sick dread on Brendan Price's face, the man who buried the compliance reports. And she saw the pure, paralyzed fear in the eyes of Silas Kincaid, the man who simply watched it all happen. Thorne slumped against his desk, the color draining entirely from his face. Lies. All lies. You're trying to ruin me because I had the courage to tell you you weren't good enough. He was desperate, clinging to his racist dismissal even as the handcuffs loomed. No, Elias, Zahra countered, taking 2 steps closer until she was standing where Thorne had been standing moments earlier. You were ruining the firm with your own failure. I didn't do this to ruin you. I did this to save Meridian. I simply needed you to be arrogant enough and racist enough to execute your final, public mistake, which confirmed the motive for all your crimes. She gestured toward the cardboard box still resting near the rug. You forced me to kneel and pack my things, Elias. You created the perfect cover for me to trigger Protocol Chimera and deliver the final, encrypted package of evidence to the DOJ. You didn't fire me to shame me. You fired me to trigger the end of you. Dr. Zahra Adana did not wait for the agents to finish their paperwork. She took a deliberate step toward Elias Thorne, who was still leaning heavily on his desk, his bluster completely evaporated, replaced by a gray, sickly look. Thorne instinctively flinched, backing up slightly, bumping into the wall paneling as Zahra invaded the space he had always considered sacrosanct. The other council members recoiled, moving further away from the focal point of the federal investigation. Zahra's green blazer was perfectly still as she stood where he had been standing only moments before, the true center of authority in the room. She was not delivering accusations anymore. She was stating facts, providing the essential context for the federal agents, and making it absolutely clear to the terrified executive council how deep their compliance had run. You wanted to talk about my performance, Elias? Zahra's voice was low, laced with the icy resentment of months spent enduring his scorn. Let's discuss performance. When I took over this firm 3 years ago, it was a hollowed-out carcass, bleeding capital, fueled by predatory lending practices you put in place 2 decades ago. I built it back. Every single quarterly record you touted in your shareholder meetings, the ones you claimed restored Meridian to its former glory, those were my strategies. My teams. My results. She paused, letting the bitter truth hang in the air. And while I was generating those records, what were you doing? You were funneling the profits through the shell companies I just told the SEC about. You took credit for my quarterly records while actively funneling capital through shell companies and blocking every audit I commissioned that might have exposed those fraudulent transfers. Her focus shifted to Brendan Price, the general counsel, who was currently attempting to become one with the wall. And you, Brendan, were his cleanup crew. You suppressed the discrimination lawsuits. You rewrote the internal memos on compliance. You actively aided and abetted the largest systematic financial fraud in this firm's history, all while I was trying to stop the decay you were protecting. Thorne managed a desperate, final attempt at self-defense. She's lying. She has no proof. She's trying to seize control. Zahra cut him off with a chilling calmness. You're wrong, Elias. I have every shred of proof. You believe I simply tolerated your archaic rules, your petty insults, your refusal to acknowledge my success. You believe I was so desperate to hold on to the CEO title that I was blind to your crimes. She looked directly at Agent Reynolds, then back at Thorne. The truth is, the only reason the firm survived your greed this long is because I was building the case against you from the inside. I was your compliance officer, your chief investigator, and your ultimate witness. Every time you spoke, I listened. Every document you signed, I secured a backup. I did not work for you, Elias. I worked against you. The realization in the room was devastating. Zahra had used her position, the very position he had tried to humiliate her out of, as a 9-month federal staging post. Her silence, her composure, the very act of kneeling to pack her box, it was all deliberate. It was the cover for the final, encrypted activation of Protocol Chimera, the code that had just brought the full force of the federal government crashing down on his office. She hadn't been defeated. She had been preparing the kill stroke. The room, already saturated with fear and disbelief, snapped to attention as Dr. Zahra Adana turned her icy focus from the disgraced chairman to the 6 members of the executive council. These men were the true enablers, whose careers had been built on their proximity to Elias Thorne's power and their willingness to look the other way. Now for the rest of the cleanup, Zahra said, her voice cutting across the room with the precision of a scalpel. She wasn't asking or suggesting. She was issuing executive orders. The corruption in this firm ran deeper than one man. It was systemic. It required protection, complicity, and silence. And I know precisely which of you provided each. She walked toward the cluster of executives, making them retreat slightly, like a pack of wolves suddenly confronted by the alpha. She stopped directly in front of Brendan Price, the general counsel, whose face was still a shade of sickly green. "Brendan Price," she stated, her gaze fixed on him. "You are the architect of the cover-up. You deliberately buried federal inquiry letters. You actively facilitated the fraud. As of this moment, your access is revoked. You are removed from all duties, effective immediately, pending federal indictment for aiding and abetting and obstruction of justice." Price found a pathetic, sputtering voice. "You can't do this. I am the general counsel. I am still employed here." "You are a co-conspirator," Zahra corrected him flatly. She shifted her gaze to Alastair Finch, the COO, the most visibly anxious man in the room, whose drumming fingers had finally stilled. "Alastair Finch, your involvement in the shell companies is fully documented, including your specific wire transfers and personal kickbacks. You are also removed from all duties, effective now, pending federal indictment for fraud and money laundering." Finch instinctively tried to pull out his phone, likely to call his own lawyer, but one of the U.S. Marshals, moving with quiet, swift efficiency, stepped forward and clamped a hand down on his arm, nodding toward the open door. Finally, Zahra pointed to the third man, Silas Kincaid, the head of fixed income, who had remained chillingly silent throughout the ordeal. "And Silas Kincaid, you didn't actively steal, but you knew. You knew the fraud was happening, and you leveraged it to benefit your own division. You signed compliance forms that you knew were false. You are removed, pending full internal investigation and review by the SEC. Your employment with Meridian Global Capital is terminated." All three men immediately attempted to protest, their voices overlapping in a desperate, panicked chorus of denial. "This is political," Price yelled. "You have no authority to." "I am the CEO, Mr. Price," Zahra stated, her voice iron. "And the firm is under federal supervision, which grants me complete executive power to neutralize threats to the institution. You three are immediate threats." The two U.S. Marshals moved forward, not with violence, but with an air of finality that needed no aggression. They quietly and firmly guided Price, Finch, and Kincaid toward the crashingly opened doors. As they were escorted out, their suits, which had symbolized power 10 minutes ago, now looked like costumes of disgrace. They were dragged past the remaining 3 council members, who stood frozen, their earlier smugness gone, replaced by the profound, paralyzing fear that they might be next. Zahra watched them go, the sheer speed and decisiveness of the removal cementing her absolute, unchallengeable authority in the room. Her clean slate had just begun. The silence that followed the removal of the 3 disgraced council members was the silence of absolute, final authority. The air was charged with it. Elias Thorne, still leaning on the desk he no longer controlled, watched the U.S. Marshals take his former colleagues with an expression of utterly defeated fury. The lead DOJ agent, the woman who had initiated the federal takeover, now approached Thorne. Her expression was entirely professional, cold, and impersonal. She held a warrant in one hand and a small card in the other. This was the moment of formal, personal consequence. "Elias Thorne," she stated, her voice formal and official. "Based on the findings of the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission and the evidence provided under the Financial Fraud and Whistleblower Protection Act, you are hereby placed under arrest." She began to read from the card, the words, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you," sounding impossibly harsh in the plush surroundings of his private office. Thorne didn't hear the full reading. His eyes, burning with hatred and disbelief, were locked on Dr. Zahra Adana. He had been stripped of his power, his allies, and his reputation, and he knew who had dealt the final blow. He lunged slightly forward, his voice a guttural, desperate scream. You sold us out. You destroyed this firm. You were supposed to be better than this." Zahra didn't flinch. She allowed the full, venomous weight of his anger to wash over her. And then she delivered her final, devastating counterpoint. Her voice was perfectly calm, an oasis of truth in the emotional storm he was manufacturing. You are fundamentally mistaken, Elias. I didn't destroy anything. You destroyed it when you sacrificed integrity for profit. You destroyed it when you traded stability for a personal slush fund. You destroyed it the moment you tried to use systemic prejudice to mask systemic crime. She gestured toward the room, encompassing the marshals and the federal agents. I simply executed the salvage plan. I am not the cause of Meridian's collapse. I am the firm's survival. The DOJ agent stepped in immediately, signaling the 2 U.S. Marshals to take custody. Thorne resisted feebly, shouting incoherent threats and denials. But the Marshals were swift and professional. They turned him, pushing his hands behind his back. The loud, metallic click of the handcuffs was the final, definitive punctuation mark on his career. He was reduced to a criminal in a perfectly tailored suit, defeated not by an outside enemy, but by the woman he had tried to humiliate into silence. As he was led toward the door, the same door he had crashed open minutes earlier in his fury, Thorne's last gaze was one of pure, impotent rage directed at Zahra. She merely watched him go, not with vengeance, but with the cold, clear satisfaction of a surgeon who has successfully removed a malignant tumor. The chairman was gone. The firm was under control. The final act of authority was complete. The room had emptied of the corrupted and the arrested. Only Dr. Zahra Adana, the 3 federal agents, the 2 marshals, and the 3 shell-shocked remaining executive council members remained. The vast office, moments ago a cauldron of chaos, now felt cold and surgical. The remaining executives, pale, terrified, and visibly sweating, were standing near the window, desperate to appear innocent, but knowing that their careers were hanging by a thread. Zahra turned to them, her expression unreadable. Gentlemen, you have just witnessed the removal of your chairman and 3 key members of the council for criminal fraud. This firm is under federal supervision, and every remaining employee is under intense scrutiny. Your loyalty to Elias Thorne is irrelevant now. Your loyalty to Meridian Global Capital is all that matters, and that loyalty is now under scrutiny. She didn't wait for their stammered reassurances. She had a firm to rebuild and zero patience for posturing. Her eyes drifted to the corner where the cardboard box still sat, a testament to the humiliation Thorne had tried to inflict. She walked over to it slowly, reaching inside and retrieving the 2 items he had carelessly thrown in, her brass nameplate and her CO of the Year award. She held them, not with sentimentality, but with the quiet dignity of someone reclaiming stolen property. She placed the box gently on the floor. Zahra then turned to the lead DOJ agent. The immediate crisis is contained. Protocol Chimera is complete. She took a deep breath, her eyes blazing with renewed purpose. Agent, effective immediately, I am resuming my role as the Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Global Capital under the mandate of the Federal Supervisory Team. The firm needs immediate, stable leadership to prevent a market panic. The DOJ agent nodded, confirming the prearranged plan. Under the terms of the supervisory agreement, your executive authority is reinstated, Dr. Adana. We will be installing a full supervisory team in the compliance department, but the operational leadership is yours. Good, Zahra said crisply. Then the first order of business is establishing an interim board of directors to authorize the federal compliance measures and maintain market confidence. I want those 3 gentlemen. She gestured to the remaining council members, who suddenly looked like they might faint from the combination of fear and relief, in the main conference room immediately. They will be working under my direct supervision for the next 48 hours, proving their commitment to integrity and the firm. She gave them a single, chilling instruction: don't bother going home. She looked back at the federal team. We will begin the internal audit process now. Every department head needs to be notified that business has changed. Meridian is no longer operating under the rule of old men and corrupt secrets. We are operating under the rule of law. The clean slate had been achieved, not with bloodshed, but with strategic, unyielding justice. Zahra was back, and the reconstruction of her firm had just begun. With the federal agents securing the crime scene and the remaining council members scrambling to appear useful, Dr. Zahra Adana did not linger in Elias Thorne's old office. She had accomplished the objective. The tumor of corruption had been excised, and the salvage operation was underway. She paused only long enough to retrieve her CEO badge from the marshal, confirming that it was now evidence of her reinstated authority, not her humiliation. Then, she walked out of the massive oak doors, stepping past the chaos the federal intrusion had created in the outer executive lounge. She strode through the space that had been occupied by the disgraced executives. Their seats were now starkly empty, a visual monument to the swift, decisive justice that had just occurred. Her eyes scanned the executive assistant's desk. Layla, her fiercely loyal assistant, looked up, her face a mixture of shock, relief, and triumphant pride. "Layla," Zahra commanded, her voice ringing with the clarity of a leader who had just won a war. "I need you to call a mandatory, all-hands meeting. I want the entire firm, analysts, traders, compliance, and janitorial staff, in the main auditorium in 60 minutes. Clear the schedules. No exceptions." Layla, already reaching for her phone, nodded sharply. "And the agenda, Dr. Adana?" Zahra stopped, her gaze sweeping over the polished marble floor and the towering glass walls that framed the financial district. The office of Meridian Global Capital was a fortress of wealth, but now, it finally felt clean. "The agenda is simple," Zahra said, her voice dropping to a powerful statement of intent. "It is integrity, day one. Tell them this firm is no longer defined by old wealth, entitlement, or the secrets of the past. It will be defined by the work we do, the principles we uphold, and the new structure we build together." She reached up and took the CEO badge in her hand. It was a solid, engraved piece of metal, but it represented more than just a title now. It represented the proof that her silent strategy had succeeded. She clipped the badge firmly onto the lapel of her green blazer, letting the metal settle exactly where it belonged. Zahra then walked to the immense window overlooking the vast, sparkling grid of the city skyline. The financial heart of the world stretched out beneath her, a kingdom now secured. She was no longer kneeling. She was no longer a scapegoat. She was the unwavering force of correction. She looked out at the towers, not as a woman who had been fired, but as the true, legitimate owner of the kingdom, ready to begin the work of reconstruction. The new era had arrived. And that is the truth of how Dr. Zahra Adana saved her firm. She didn't fight power with anger. She fought it with strategy, using her humiliation as the final, necessary trigger for justice. The men who sought to destroy her found themselves arrested, their era of corruption over, replaced by a leader defined by integrity, not by entitlement. What a powerful end to a brutal story. Which moment stunned you the most? Thorne's arrest, or Zahra's calm return to power? Hit the like button, share this story, and tell us in the comments what you would have done in Zahra's shoes. Don't miss another story where dignity rises and arrogance collapses. Subscribe now and turn on notifications for more narratives where the truth hits harder than any public humiliation.